She only wanted to surprise her husband with lunch. A simple gesture, grilled chicken wraps, 2 homemade cookies, and a folded note with a smiley face. But when Savannah Blake pushed open the door to her husband's private law office, what she saw inside froze her in place. Caleb Bishop, the man she had sacrificed for, the man she had built her life around, wasn't alone. And the woman in his arms wasn't just anyone, it was her sister. That single moment didn't just shatter a marriage. It would rip open hidden betrayals, ignite a scandal that would spread across Mariela Heights, and expose the cracks in one of the city's most powerful law firms. Sometimes the deepest cuts don't come from strangers. They come from the people who share your blood. This is the story of how a wife's innocent surprise turned into her cruelest nightmare, and how one act of betrayal in a glittering city office would change 3 lives forever. But before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from today, because the next chapter of this story is one you don't want to miss. And one evening, after a heated family argument where Naomi felt belittled once again, Caleb had found her outside alone. His hand had rested on her shoulder, firm and reassuring. His voice had been soft, intimate. "You're not like what they say, Naomi. You're sharper than they think." That moment had been the spark. From then on, she had leaned into his compliments, seeking his attention with carefully chosen dresses and subtle touches. Caleb, arrogant and hungry for validation, hadn't resisted. Naomi justified it all with twisted logic. "Savannah already has his love. I'm just borrowing a little of it. I deserve something too. I deserve to feel special." But deep down, Naomi knew it wasn't just about Caleb. It was about Savannah. Every kiss, every secret meeting in that office was less about passion and more about evening the scales. Each time Caleb whispered her name, Naomi thought, now I have something she doesn't. Still, beneath her bravado, fear brewed. Fear that Savannah's strength would eventually crush her. Fear that Caleb's smooth words were nothing more than lies dressed in luxury. Fear that she was nothing more than a shadow trying to steal the sun. In the silence of her apartment overlooking the busy streets of Mariela Heights, Naomi often stared at herself in the mirror, lipstick smudged, hair tousled, wondering if she had gained anything at all, or if she had just become a thief of her own sister's trust. And yet, when Caleb's hand traced her arm in that private office, she pushed the guilt aside. For the first time, she felt chosen. But somewhere, buried under her envy and desire, Naomi knew this fire would not burn forever. And when Savannah's eyes had locked on hers in that office doorway, Naomi had felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Because she had seen something in her sister's gaze she had never seen before. Power. And Naomi knew she was in danger of losing everything she thought she had won. Caleb Bishop was a man who understood the power of appearance. In Mariela Heights, where deals were struck over wine lists longer than novels and reputations were traded like stocks, Caleb had mastered the art of presentation. His charm was his greatest weapon, sharp enough to win clients, soft enough to disarm critics, and seductive enough to blur the lines of loyalty in his marriage. But it hadn't always been that way. He had arrived in the city as a broke law student, carrying only one faded suitcase and an ambition larger than the skyline. His parents had been modest school teachers in a rural town, and though they could barely afford his tuition, they had scraped together every coin. Caleb promised them he would make something of himself, and in that promise lay both his strength and his eventual corruption. Savannah had been his anchor then, the woman who saw him not as the poor boy struggling to fit in among the city's elite, but as the man he could become. He remembered the night she ironed his suit for an internship interview, her hair tied back, her face glowing with pride as she whispered, "You'll own this city one day." And Caleb had believed her. Year after year, he clawed his way up the ladder. He stayed late at firms where partners barely remembered his name. He took on cases others avoided, sacrificing sleep for recognition. He learned quickly that winning wasn't always about justice. It was about who told the story better, who wore the better suit, who shook hands with more conviction. And Caleb told stories better than anyone. By his 30th birthday, he was no longer the nervous associate begging for scraps. He had carved out his own name in Mariela Heights legal circles, a name spoken with a mix of admiration and envy. His office overlooked the heart of the city, a glass tower that sparkled like a crown under the night sky. He drove a black Maserati that purred down the boulevards, and his face appeared in glossy magazines beside headlines like, "The Lawyer Who Never Loses." But with success came arrogance. The gratitude he had once felt toward Savannah slowly twisted into entitlement. In his mind, she had served her role, She had built him, supported him, sacrificed for him. But now that he had arrived, Caleb saw himself as the prize. He deserved more. More recognition, more pleasure, more admiration. And when Naomi began orbiting closer, with her wide eyes and hungry attention, Caleb's ego absorbed it like wine poured into crystal. She made him feel desired not as a husband, but as a man untouchable, a man irresistible. Savannah, with her quiet strength and sacrifices, reminded him of his past, those ramen dinners, the panic attacks, the threadbare suits. Naomi, on the other hand, reflected his present, sleek, hungry, and dazzled by the man he had become. Caleb didn't think of betrayal. He thought of balance. Why shouldn't I have both? He often told himself as he loosened his tie in Naomi's presence. Savannah is my stability. Naomi is my indulgence. A man of my stature deserves this. In his mind, loyalty was negotiable, but image was not. And so Caleb moved through the city with his trademark smile, shaking hands at galas, delivering eloquent speeches in packed courtrooms, and posing for photographs that captured the gleam of success. He looked every inch the devoted husband, the rising star of Mariela Heights. But beneath that polished exterior was a man who believed he was untouchable, a man who thought his charm could disguise the cracks spreading through his carefully curated life. What Caleb did not realize, what his arrogance blinded him to, was that Savannah's silence was not weakness. It was calculation. And while he preened under the city's bright lights, Savannah's eyes had already begun adjusting to the shadows, preparing for a fight he did not see coming. Savannah stood frozen in the doorway, her heart torn to shreds, but her face unreadable. Caleb's voice, smooth and commanding, echoed behind her, trying to reel her back. Naomi's words tumbled out in broken pleas, but Savannah heard none of it. The noise in her chest was louder. The crack of betrayal, the thunder of humiliation, the faint whisper of resolve forming where her love had once been. She bent down slowly, almost mechanically, and picked up the crumpled lunch bag from the floor. The note slipped further out, its smiley face still mocking her, but she tucked it back inside. She refused to leave even that behind. Her love, her effort, her history, they would not remain in that office, tainted by their betrayal. She did not cry. She did not scream. She turned, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each step heavy but deliberate. "Savannah, wait!" Naomi's voice cracked, trembling with a fear she tried to mask with desperation. Caleb's tone followed, clipped with irritation. "This isn't the place, Savannah. Don't embarrass yourself." The words struck her, but she didn't falter. If anything, they hardened her resolve. She walked past the receptionist, past the rows of young associates who pretended to be glued to their screens but stole nervous glances at her. Everyone in the firm knew who she was, Mrs. Bishop, the elegant woman behind the city's golden lawyer. And now they saw her leave, face pale but spine unbending. The glass doors of Bishop and Cole swung open with a hiss, and Savannah stepped into the heartbeat of Mariela Heights. The city was alive. Chauffeured cars lined the streets, carrying executives to power lunches. Boutique shop windows glittered with diamond displays. A street violinist played a soulful tune that clashed against the honking horns of impatient drivers. The skyline shimmered in the noonday sun, towers rising like giants against the horizon. Savannah paused at the curb, the sounds of the city crashing into her like a wave. She wanted to collapse, to let the weight of betrayal pull her under. But instead, she inhaled deeply, the crisp air filling her lungs, and forced herself to stand straighter. Her phone buzzed in her bag. For a moment, she thought it might be Caleb, already crafting an explanation or a command. But when she checked, it was a simple text reminder. Dinner reservation at Le Papillon, 8 p.m. The restaurant they had booked a week ago, one of the most exclusive spots in Mariela Heights, where reservations were harder to secure than courtroom victories. Savannah's lips twitched into something between a laugh and a sob. The irony was sharp. She silenced the phone, slipped it back into her bag, and crossed the street. The heels of her shoes tapped against the pavement, each step a declaration. She would not give Caleb the satisfaction of a scene. She would not give Naomi the validation of her tears. Her silence, heavy and controlled, was more powerful than any outburst. As she slid into her car, the scent of the leather interior wrapped around her, familiar and suffocating. She gripped the wheel and stared at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were glassy, her lips trembling, but she saw something else too, something she hadn't noticed before. Strength. Not the strength of endurance she had carried for years, holding Caleb's dreams on her back. This was a new strength. A dangerous one. The kind born from pain and betrayal. She started the engine. The hum of the car masked the breaking inside her chest. But she knew this was not the end. It was the beginning. And as she pulled into the flow of Mariela Heights traffic, the skyscrapers towering above her like watchful eyes, Savannah whispered to herself, almost inaudibly, "You've got this." But this time, the words weren't for Caleb. They were for her. Nightfall transformed Mariela Heights into a kingdom of light. From the balcony of her penthouse, Savannah watched as the skyline came alive. Glass towers shimmered with golden windows. Rooftop bars spilled laughter into the night air. Billboards flashed with champagne ads and luxury watch campaigns. The city glowed with promise, indulgence, and deceit. But inside her, the glow was gone. Savannah sat barefoot on the cold marble floor of her living room, a half-empty glass of wine cradled in her hand. The apartment was immaculate, a spread from an architectural magazine, floor-to-ceiling windows, velvet couches, a chandelier that sparkled like a crown. Caleb had always insisted they live at the center of luxury. "Appearances matter in this city," he would say, sweeping a hand over the skyline as though he owned it. But what did appearances matter when the foundation was crumbling? The silence in the penthouse weighed on her. She had turned off her phone, unable to bear the thought of Caleb's explanations or Naomi's empty pleas. The city pulsed below her, cars crawling like veins of light, horns echoing like arguments, music spilling from clubs where couples danced too close. Yet up here, she felt like an island, abandoned and adrift. Her mind replayed the betrayal like a broken reel. Caleb's loosened tie. Naomi's hand on his chest. The arrogance in his voice when he told her not to embarrass herself. Savannah swallowed the rest of her wine. The bitterness of the drink nothing compared to the bitterness in her chest. Was love in Mariela Heights always destined to rot beneath the weight of ambition? She thought of the women she'd seen at galas, polished wives in diamond necklaces, smiling tightly while their husbands whispered into other women's ears. She thought of the gossip columns that delighted in exposing scandals, treating heartbreak as entertainment. Maybe she had been naive to believe her marriage would be different. Maybe loyalty was a fairy tale in a city built on power, money, and appetite. But then another thought surfaced, one that steadied her shaking hands. No, it isn't love that is the problem. It's Caleb. It's Naomi. Love, real love, was what had kept her by his side when he had nothing. Love had given her the strength to sacrifice, to believe in him when the world laughed at his ambition. That kind of love wasn't weak. That kind of love was power. And she still had that power inside her. Savannah rose from the floor, setting her glass on the marble counter with a sharp clink. Her reflection in the window stared back at her. Eyes swollen from tears, but jaw clenched with determination. The city lights framed her silhouette, making her look like a queen standing over her broken kingdom. She whispered aloud, as though reminding herself, "They think this will break me." Her voice didn't crack. Outside, the streets roared with life. Chauffeured cars pulled up at the steps of the Grand Mariela Hotel. Men in tuxedos stepped out, their wives shimmering in gowns. The night was young, and the city was theirs to conquer. Savannah felt the temptation to disappear, to let the betrayal consume her and hide in her sorrow. But another voice rose inside her. The same voice that had carried her through Caleb's panic attacks. The same voice that had pushed her to work double shifts while he studied law. "No, I will not hide. I will not fade." She slid her phone back on. Messages flooded the screen. Caleb, Naomi, missed calls, voicemails. She ignored them all. Instead, she scrolled to another name. Amara, her childhood friend. The only one who had ever seen her raw and unpolished. The only one who had risen in this city without betraying her soul. Savannah typed quickly. "Can we meet tomorrow? I need you." Her chest tightened, but for the first time since the office, it wasn't from pain. It was from resolve. The city outside continued to sparkle, indifferent to her heartbreak. But Savannah was beginning to see it differently. Not as a playground for betrayal, but as a stage where she would rebuild herself. And maybe, just maybe, outshine them all. The next morning, the sun spilled gold over Mariela Heights, bouncing off the skyscrapers and sparkling on the mirrored glass of luxury towers. The city woke with its usual rhythm. Chauffeured cars gliding past, cafe terraces filling with executives, the scent of espresso and fresh pastries weaving through the air. Savannah, dressed in a cream silk blouse and wide-legged trousers, walked into the lobby of the Grand Paloma Hotel, one of the most exclusive establishments in the city. The marble floors gleamed under her heels, Chandeliers twinkled above, and attendants bowed as she passed. Normally, she would have felt a pang of pride being here, proof of how far she and Caleb had come from their ramen dinners. But today, all she felt was the dull ache of betrayal. She spotted Amara at a corner table in the hotel's atrium cafe, sipping from a delicate porcelain cup. Amara was impossible to miss. Her presence radiated like royalty. She wore a navy power suit that looked as though it had been cut from silk clouds, and her diamond-studded watch caught the sunlight each time she lifted her hand. Savannah hesitated for a moment, then walked over. Amara looked up, her eyes widening slightly. "Savannah." Her tone carried warmth but also concern. "You look tired." Savannah forced a smile and sat down. A waiter appeared instantly, offering her coffee, but she waved it off. She didn't have the appetite. For a while, silence hung between them, broken only by the clinking of silver spoons and the hum of conversations around the atrium. Amara leaned back, studying her friend carefully. "Talk to me," she said finally. Savannah inhaled, steadying herself. "I walked in on Caleb yesterday." Amara's brows furrowed. "With another woman?" Savannah nodded, her voice breaking for the first time. "With my sister." The words hung in the air like a curse. A couple at the next table laughed loudly, the sound slicing into Savannah's raw confession, making it feel more surreal. Amara set her cup down with precision, her expression hardening. "Your sister." She shook her head slowly, lips pursed. "Mariela Heights never runs out of cruelty." Savannah's hands twisted in her lap. "I didn't say anything. I just walked out. But Amara, it hurts in ways I can't even explain. I gave him everything. I gave her everything. And now," her voice faltered. Tears pressed against her eyes, but she blinked them back. She would not break here, not in front of the entire city sipping its cappuccinos and whispering its gossip. Amara reached across the table, placing her manicured hand gently over Savannah's. "Listen to me. I know this city. I've lived its games. Men like Caleb think their charm is enough to cover their sins. And sisters like Naomi, well, envy is poison. They sip it every day until it eats them alive." Savannah's lips trembled. "So what do I do?" Amara's eyes sharpened. "You don't collapse. That's what they expect. Caleb thinks you'll cry, beg, maybe scream, and then forgive. Naomi thinks you'll fade away, too humiliated to fight. But you, Savannah," her grip tightened. "You are stronger than both of them combined." Savannah exhaled shakily, her chest loosening at Amara's words. "You don't need revenge, not yet," Amara continued, her voice like velvet lined with steel. "What you need is power. Find yourself again. Build your strength. Make them see you rise so high they choke on their betrayal." Savannah stared at her friend, the words sinking deep. For so long, she had defined herself by Caleb's success, by Naomi's dependence. But now, Amara was offering her a different vision. A version of herself that wasn't just a wife or a sister, but a woman of her own power. The waiter returned, setting a fresh pot of jasmine tea between them. Savannah poured herself a cup, her hands steadier now. For the first time since yesterday, she allowed herself to imagine a future not ruled by Caleb's arrogance or Naomi's envy. A future where she owned her narrative in Mariela Heights. She sipped the tea slowly, the floral warmth grounding her. Across the table, Amara smiled knowingly. "You've been the quiet strength behind a man's success," Amara said. "Now it's time to become the noise that defines your own." Savannah nodded, her pulse quickening with something new. Something she hadn't felt since before she walked into that office. Not hope. Power. Naomi Blake had always been skilled at survival. Growing up as the younger sister to Savannah meant living in shadows. Shadows of beauty, shadows of responsibility, shadows of love. Savannah was the dependable one, the achiever, the woman who had built a life of elegance and loyalty. Naomi, meanwhile, was the wild card, the one whispered about at family gatherings for her impulsiveness and dangerous charm. And now, she had crossed the one line even she had once sworn never to cross. Caleb Bishop, her sister's husband. The morning after Savannah's discovery, Naomi woke in her glass-walled condo overlooking the Mariela Marina, the city's most exclusive waterfront. Sunlight filtered through the white curtains, scattering across her silk sheets. Beside her, the bed was empty. Caleb had left hours earlier, probably returning to his wife. She lay there, staring at the ceiling, her stomach twisting. For the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar. Fear. Not of Caleb. He was predictable, easily manipulated with flattery and temptation. No, her fear was of Savannah. Savannah had seen them. The look on her sister's face as the door swung open still haunted Naomi's mind. It wasn't rage, it wasn't hysteria, it was silence. And silence, Naomi knew, was far more dangerous than shouting. By mid-morning, she was pacing her living room in a silk robe, phone in hand. The city skyline glittered beyond her, but her focus was on strategy. She needed to control the narrative before Savannah decided to expose her. The first call went to Caleb. When he answered, his voice was cold and patient. "Naomi, don't call me right now. Do you understand the risk?" Naomi leaned against the glass wall, smirking faintly. "The risk? Caleb, darling, the risk is already here. Savannah knows. We need to think smart." There was silence on the other end, followed by a sharp sigh. "She won't say anything. She's too careful with appearances." Naomi let her voice soften, wrapping around him like silk. "Maybe. But careful women are the ones who surprise you most. She could destroy both of us if she wanted. So we need to play this well. Keep her calm. Keep her doubting herself." Caleb muttered something about being late for court and hung up. Naomi lowered the phone, her smile fading. Caleb was useful, but not reliable. If he grew scared enough, he might try to distance himself from her. That couldn't happen, not when she'd already staked so much on him. The second move had to be Savannah. She dressed quickly in a tailored ivory jumpsuit, paired with gold earrings that glimmered like trophies. Her driver ferried her across the city to Savannah's penthouse. The elevator ride felt eternal, her heart hammering despite her composed exterior. When the door opened, Savannah stood there in soft loungewear, her face unreadable. "Naomi." Her tone was clipped, formal, nothing like the warmth that once greeted her sister. Naomi forced a smile. "Can we talk?" Inside, the air was tense. The chandelier sparkled above them, but neither woman noticed. Savannah crossed her arms, waiting. Naomi began softly, her voice coated in false sincerity. "Savannah, yesterday, what you saw, it wasn't what it looked like." Savannah's brow arched. "Really? Because it looked like you with your hand on my husband." Naomi's throat tightened, but she pressed on. "It was a mistake. A stupid, fleeting mistake. Caleb, he's been under stress, and she swallowed hard, lowering her gaze. "I was weak. But it meant nothing. You know me, Savvy. You know I'd never truly want to hurt you." The use of that childhood nickname, Savvy, was deliberate, a thread she hoped could pull Savannah back into sisterhood. But Savannah's silence was cutting. Naomi stepped closer, her perfume filling the space between them. "If people found out, it would destroy us all. Not just you and Caleb. Me too. The whispers in this city, the gossip, it would ruin our family. Please, can't we just put this behind us?" Savannah finally spoke, her voice steady. "You're right about one thing. Mariela Heights would feast on this. But don't mistake my silence for forgiveness." Naomi's lips parted, but no words came. Savannah's eyes, once gentle, were now cold steel. The conversation ended there. Naomi left with her mask intact, smiling faintly as she walked through the marble lobby, but inside she was unraveling. Because for the first time, Naomi realized something terrifying. Savannah wasn't going to scream. Savannah wasn't going to run. Savannah was going to fight. And Naomi wasn't sure she knew how to win against a sister who had nothing left to lose. Caleb Bishop prided himself on control. In the courtroom, he was a master strategist, calm, sharp, untouchable. He had built his reputation in Mariela Heights as the lawyer who never cracked under pressure. But outside the courtroom, life was slipping through his fingers like grains of sand. By the end of the week, the cracks were already showing. At the firm, his associates whispered when he passed, their eyes darting away quickly. His secretary, who once greeted him with cheerful efficiency, now seemed stiff-guarded. And when he looked in the mirror each morning, the man staring back at him was pale, restless, with dark circles carving into his once pristine image. Savannah's silence haunted him. Her silence was worse than rage. If she had shouted, cried, or thrown him out of the house, he could have managed that. But the way she carried herself, still graceful, still attending charity galas, still smiling in front of their friends, made him nervous. She was planning something. He could feel it. And then there was Naomi. Naomi had always been a temptation, but now she was a liability. She called too often, texted too much, demanded meetings in hidden corners of the city. Her perfume lingered on his suits longer than he liked, and once, Savannah had walked past his jacket without touching it, her face unreadable. That tiny moment had nearly sent Caleb spiraling. On Thursday, after winning a grueling court case, Caleb sat in his corner office, staring out at the skyline of Mariela Heights. The glass towers reflected the setting sun, glowing gold like a city dipped in luxury. It should have been his moment of triumph. Instead, his chest tightened. The phone on his desk buzzed. A message from Naomi. Dinner tonight. Same place. Don't keep me waiting. Almost immediately, another notification came in. Savannah's assistant confirming their attendance at the governor's ball that same evening. Caleb rubbed his temples. 2 women. 2 obligations. One mistake already snowballing into chaos. That night, he attempted the impossible. He arrived at the governor's ball with Savannah, his arm linked with hers, their smiles picture-perfect for the cameras. She wore an emerald gown that shimmered beneath the chandelier light, her poise unmatched. Around them, city elites sipped champagne, exchanged deals, and whispered rumors. Caleb forced his laughter, forced his charm, but he could feel Savannah's stillness beside him, calculated, powerful, unnerving. Halfway through the evening, he excused himself to the restroom and slipped away. A driver waited at the side entrance to rush him across the city to a hidden rooftop restaurant where Naomi was waiting, her hair swept up, her dress daringly short. Finally, she purred, kissing him like he belonged to her. But Caleb couldn't shake the dread curling in his stomach. He checked his watch constantly, calculating how long he could stay before returning to Savannah without raising suspicion. Naomi noticed, of course. You're distracted, she hissed, her smile faltering. Don't tell me she still has this much power over you. Caleb's jaw tightened. This isn't about power. It's about appearances. One wrong move, and everything I've built collapses. Naomi laughed bitterly, sipping her wine. Then maybe you should decide who you're protecting, your career or your marriage. The words cut deep. By the time Caleb slipped back into the governor's ball, Savannah was standing near the balcony, speaking effortlessly with the mayor's wife. She turned slightly as he approached, her eyes locking onto his with quiet sharpness. Caleb smiled for the cameras, his arms sliding around her waist, but inside his panic grew. For the first time in his life, Caleb Bishop realized something terrifying. He could outwit judges. He could outtalk juries. But he might not be able to outmaneuver 2 women, one fueled by desire and one fueled by betrayal. Savannah Blake Bishop had learned long ago that survival in Mariela Heights wasn't about loud gestures. It was about precision, timing, choosing the right silence, the right smile, the right room to plant a seed of doubt. Her husband thought her silence was weakness. Naomi thought it was hesitation. But what neither of them understood was that Savannah had entered a phase of watching, waiting, calculating. And she was very, very good at it. After the night of the governor's ball, Savannah spent her mornings on her balcony, coffee in hand, gazing out at the skyline. The penthouse overlooked the entire city, the glittering Mariela Marina, the glass towers of the financial district, the distant hills lined with estates. From here, she reminded herself that her world was not just her marriage. Her influence stretched far wider. But influence had to be sharpened into a weapon. The first move Savannah made was subtle. She contacted Clara Mensa, a longtime friend and the editor-in-chief of City Lux magazine. Clara had been trying for months to convince Savannah to be featured in a profile about powerful women of Mariela Heights. Savannah had always declined, preferring to stay in the background while Caleb shone. But now she accepted. At their lunch in the chandelier-lit atrium of Le Sable, Savannah leaned across the table, her voice calm, warm. I think the timing is right. But Clara, I want the story to be about resilience. About women who stand firm in a world that tries to break them. Clara, sensing something beneath the words, nodded with keen interest. Of course. And Savannah, you have no idea how many women need to see someone like you step into the light. By the end of the meal, Savannah had secured not only the cover story but also a promise. Clara would help control whatever narrative Savannah wanted to release into the city. Her second move came days later. At a charity luncheon, Savannah deliberately seated herself next to Judge Emmanuel Obeng, one of Caleb's most powerful allies in the courts. Their conversation was light, sprinkled with laughter, but beneath it Savannah began weaving her thread, hinting at Caleb's exhaustion, his distractions, his tendency to overextend. Not accusations, just whispers of concern. By the time dessert was served, the judge was shaking his head sympathetically. Caleb must be careful, Mrs. Bishop. Men with too many obligations often stumble. Exactly the thought Savannah wanted planted. Back at home, her strategy stretched further. She quietly began transferring portions of her personal savings into separate accounts, accounts Caleb didn't know existed. Investments, real estate interests, even art pieces moved quietly into her name alone. The financial empire Caleb thought they shared was slowly, invisibly, being redrawn. And then there was Naomi. Savannah didn't confront her again, but she kept her close. She answered her calls politely, attended brunches when Naomi invited, smiled when others were watching. It was deliberate, because the closer Naomi thought she was, the easier it would be for Savannah to predict her moves. One evening, after Naomi left her penthouse, Savannah sat in the silent living room, the city glittering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She held a glass of wine, her face calm, but her thoughts fierce. She thought of her husband, charming but weak. She thought of her sister, reckless and hungry. Then she whispered to herself, so softly it was almost a vow. They believe they're playing me. But the truth is, I've already begun playing them. Savannah didn't yet know exactly how she would strike. But the pieces were moving. The allies were gathering. And for the first time since that day in Caleb's office, she felt a dangerous kind of power rising in her chest. Naomi Blake had always been the center of attention. From childhood, she was the girl everyone looked at, the prettier sister, the daring one, the one with the laugh that turned heads in restaurants. Men chased her, women envied her, and Savannah had always been the quiet shadow. But lately, that shadow had started to glow. It gnawed at Naomi's chest every time she saw her sister glide into a room with her emerald gowns and serene smile. People who once whispered to Naomi now leaned toward Savannah. At the governor's ball, it was Savannah whose name slipped into every conversation. And when City Lux magazine announced Savannah as their next cover feature, Naomi nearly shattered her wine glass against the marble floor of her apartment. She's playing a game, Naomi hissed to herself, pacing her living room. The city skyline twinkled outside, but she barely noticed. She's not broken. She's not devastated. She's planning something. And the worst part, Caleb had noticed too. At their last secret dinner, Naomi had leaned in close, expecting him to melt the way he always did. But instead of hungry desire in his eyes, she'd caught something else, hesitation. Worry. Even guilt. You're thinking about her, Naomi accused, her hand tightening on his sleeve. Caleb sighed, pulling away slightly. Savannah is my wife, Naomi. Don't forget that. The word struck like a slap. Naomi's pride bristled, her jealousy flared. For years she had watched Savannah be the perfect wife, the polished woman everyone respected, while Naomi was labeled the reckless younger sister. And now, even when she had stolen Caleb's attention, she still couldn't compete. The rage simmered until it became uncontrollable. Naomi began acting out in ways that alarmed even her closest friends. She showed up uninvited at Caleb's office, her perfume heavy, her dress too short for business hours. She sent him messages at odd times, sometimes in the middle of the night. Messages that were fiery, reckless, sometimes even threatening. Once, when Caleb didn't reply quickly enough, Naomi marched straight into Le Sable, knowing Savannah was there for lunch, and deliberately leaned over Caleb's table in front of half the restaurant. "Darling, you forgot this," she said sweetly, dropping a silk handkerchief on his lap. The entire room froze. Savannah didn't even blink. She simply continued her conversation with the mayor's wife, as though Naomi were invisible. That silence burned Naomi worse than any insult. Later that evening, Naomi stormed into Caleb's apartment, tears streaking her mascara. "She's mocking me," she screamed. She knows, and she's making me look like a fool." Caleb tried to calm her, but his patience was wearing thin. "You need to stop drawing attention. If people start to talk..." Naomi cut him off, her voice sharp and desperate. "Let them talk. I don't care about your stupid reputation. I want you, not her. And I won't sit back while she plays this game." For the first time, Caleb raised his voice. "Naomi, enough." The words echoed in the apartment, hanging heavy in the air. Naomi froze, staring at him, realizing she had pushed too far. But the jealousy had already consumed her. As she left, slamming the door behind her, Naomi made a dangerous vow. "If Savannah thinks she can outshine me," she muttered into the night, "then I'll burn everything around her until she has nothing left to stand on." Her rage was no longer about Caleb. It was about war. And Naomi was prepared to fight dirty. Caleb Bishop had built his career on control. In the courtroom, his voice was steady as granite. In negotiations, he was measured, never raising his tone, never letting his opponents see him sweat. Judges admired him, rivals feared him, clients trusted him. But lately, Caleb was unraveling. Everywhere he turned, Someone seemed to know something. The partners at his law firm eyed him strangely when he walked into meetings. Judge Obeng, usually warm, had been distant during their last encounter. And even the governor, who once boasted about Caleb's brilliance at cocktail parties, seemed hesitant, his compliments now muted. The whispers were growing, and Caleb couldn't trace where they had started. At home, Savannah's silence was louder than any argument. She no longer questioned his late nights. She no longer searched his eyes for explanations. She simply smiled politely, moved gracefully through the penthouse, and treated him with a detached kindness that chilled him more than anger ever could. At first, he thought she was broken. But lately, he wasn't so sure. When she appeared on the cover of City Luxe magazine, a vision in emerald silk, her gaze steady and regal, it hit Caleb like a verdict. The city was seeing her differently. She was no longer just Caleb Bishop's wife. She was Savannah Blake Bishop, a woman admired in her own right. And with that shift, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in years: fear. Naomi didn't make things easier. She was spiraling out of control, and her recklessness threatened to drag him down with her. The night she stormed into Le Sable, Caleb nearly choked on his wine. The humiliation was sharp, made worse by the way Savannah didn't even flinch. That composure, the unspoken declaration that she held the higher ground, left Caleb shaken. But Naomi wouldn't let go. She flooded his phone with messages, appeared unannounced at his office, and even once waited outside the courthouse in sunglasses like a lover in some cheap drama. Caleb had to wave her away furiously, terrified someone might see. "You're going to ruin me," he snapped at her one evening, his voice low and dangerous. Naomi only smirked, her lips brushing his ear. "No, darling. I'm the only one who truly loves you. She's the one who's already planning your funeral." The words lingered long after she left. Was it paranoia, or did Naomi sense the truth? Caleb's firm, Bishop & Cole, was also demanding more from him. A multi-million-dollar oil contract was hanging by a thread, and the partners insisted he lead the negotiations. But with his personal life crumbling, Caleb found it harder and harder to focus. His presentations lacked their usual edge, his arguments stumbled, and once, unthinkably, he even forgot a crucial clause mid-meeting. "Are you all right, Caleb?" his senior partner, Harold Cole, asked, peering over his glasses. "You seem distracted lately." Caleb forced a smile. "Just exhaustion. It won't happen again." But inside, he felt the lie burning. At night, when Savannah slipped into bed beside him without a word, when Naomi's perfume lingered on his suit jacket, when clients looked at him with the faintest flicker of doubt, Caleb realized the walls were closing in. For the first time, the man who controlled courtrooms felt utterly powerless. And the worst part was this: he didn't know which woman was more dangerous, Naomi with her recklessness or Savannah with her silence. In Mariela Heights, secrets never stayed buried for long. The city's elite thrived on whispers, on the quiet exchanges at charity galas, the knowing glances across ballroom floors, the murmurs that floated through glass-walled penthouses like perfume. And lately, those whispers carried the same name, Caleb Bishop. It began softly, like the first crack in porcelain. A client, waiting too long for Caleb at the courthouse, spotted Naomi Blake slipping out of his office with her lipstick smudged. A week later, a waiter at Le Sable mentioned seeing Caleb, a little too close, to the woman who was not his wife. By the time the governor's gala arrived, the rumors had grown wings. "Such a shame," Lady Osakwe whispered, sipping champagne in her diamond necklace. "Savannah is far too regal for this mess." "I heard it was her sister," another guest replied, eyes wide. Imagine the betrayal in her own bloodline. The whispers spread like fire through silk. By midnight, half the ballroom had turned to glance at Savannah, who floated through the hall in a crimson gown, her face unreadable. She seemed untouched, but her silence only made the rumors stronger. Caleb, meanwhile, felt the weight of every glance. He caught snippets of laughter that died as he entered conversations, saw partners exchange glances when his name was mentioned. Even judges, once his allies, now regarded him with a faint caution, as though scandal might stain their robes by association. Naomi, however, seemed to thrive on the whispers. She strutted into events more boldly than ever, her dresses shorter, her perfume heavier, her smiles sharper. "They're all talking about us," she purred to Caleb one night, her hand sliding across his chest. "That means we're winning." But Caleb didn't see victory. He saw ruin. At the Mariela Heights art auction, the whispers reached a fever pitch. Savannah, luminous in sapphire silk, stood beside the city's most powerful figures. When the mayor's wife leaned in and murmured, "You've been so strong, my dear," Savannah only smiled faintly. She didn't deny. She didn't confirm. She simply let the room believe whatever it wanted. That silence was its own kind of power. Caleb's world, however, was crumbling. A client pulled out of a major deal, citing instability. Judge Obeng excused himself coldly from their usual post-trial lunch. And Harold Cole, his partner, called him into the office. "These rumors," Harold said, adjusting his tie. "Whether true or not, they're becoming a distraction. A dangerous one. Our clients value discretion. If you can't control your personal affairs, Caleb, you risk more than your marriage. You risk this firm." Caleb left the office that evening with his heart pounding. The city skyline glittered, but for him, it felt like glass shattering. Meanwhile, Naomi was busy fanning the flames. She whispered to friends in cocktail bars, leaked half-truths to gossip columnists, and made sure she was always seen in the right places. Always close enough to Caleb's orbit that no one could miss the connection. What Naomi didn't realize was that Savannah, in her quiet, deliberate way, was also pulling strings. She never raised her voice, never pointed fingers. Instead, she cultivated sympathy, building alliances with the wives of CEOs, the partners of governors, the women who truly shaped the city's opinions. So while Naomi screamed louder, Savannah whispered softer. And in Mariela Heights, it was the softer whispers that carried the most power. By the end of the season, the city had chosen its heroine. And Caleb, once untouchable, was now the man everyone pitied. Savannah Blake Bishop had always been underestimated. For years, she was known only as Caleb's supportive wife. The woman who ironed his shirts before court, who smiled quietly at networking events, who stayed home to host perfect dinners while he built his empire. People mistook her silence for weakness, her elegance for passivity. But Savannah had learned that in Mariela Heights, silence was a weapon. And now, she was ready to wield it. She began her moves with precision. At first, it was small things. A donation to the city's children's hospital in her name alone. A luncheon she hosted for influential women at the Mariela Club, an appearance at an art gallery opening where she stood confidently beside the city's most photographed philanthropists. She was no longer a shadow in Caleb's orbit. She was a star in her own right. Her wardrobe shifted too. Where she once chose neutral gowns that blended seamlessly into Caleb's tailored suits, she now dressed with deliberate boldness. Emerald silks, sapphire satins, crimson velvets. Each outfit a declaration. Each step a reminder that she could command a room without uttering a word. The city noticed. "She has grace," Lady Osakwe murmured at a charity auction. "Grace? She has power," corrected another, watching Savannah glide past with the faintest smile. Caleb, watching from across the room, felt the shift like a knife. Savannah was rising, and he couldn't control it. Worse, people began seeking her opinion instead of his. At one gala, the governor's wife asked Savannah for advice on a new cultural foundation. At another, a bank director invited her to chair a philanthropic board. And Savannah accepted, strategically, carefully, placing herself at the center of circles Caleb once dominated. But her moves weren't just social. Behind the velvet gowns and perfect posture, Savannah was tightening her financial independence. Quietly, she reopened a bank account in her maiden name. She transferred shares from a joint investment portfolio to one registered solely under her control. With the help of discreet advisors, she began acquiring small but significant stakes in art houses and luxury spas that catered to Mariela Heights' elite women. Naomi mocked it when she found out. Philanthropy luncheons and charity boards? Oh, please. That's not power, Savannah. It's vanity. Savannah only smiled. And yet, vanity is what this city listens to. Her most calculated move, however, was personal. Instead of confronting Caleb about Naomi, she treated him with a calm, distant politeness that drove him insane. She no longer asked about his schedule. She no longer demanded explanations. She kissed his cheek before galas, smiled for cameras, and then floated into conversations without him. The more she withheld, the more Caleb unraveled. And the more Caleb unraveled, the more the city leaned toward Savannah. In private, she still felt the ache of betrayal. Late at night, she sometimes sat alone on the penthouse balcony, the city lights blurring as tears pricked her eyes. But by morning, she was composed again, her armor polished and unbreakable. Savannah knew something Naomi didn't. In Mariela Heights, scandals didn't destroy people. How they responded to them did. And Savannah was determined not just to survive, but to rise higher than ever. Her game had only begun. And already Caleb was losing. Naomi Blake had always been hungry for attention. Her whole life, she had lived in Savannah's shadow, the prettier, smarter, more disciplined sister, praised at family dinners, admired at school reunions, adored by relatives. Naomi was used to being the second glance, the afterthought, the one men noticed only after Savannah left the room. So when Caleb's eyes had lingered on her, when his hands had reached for her in the shadows of his law office, Naomi felt something ignite, a hunger she hadn't known could be satisfied. At first, she believed she had won. She believed Caleb would tire of Savannah's elegance and cling to her wild fire. But now she saw things slipping. Every gala, every event, every board meeting Savannah attended, Naomi noticed the shift. The city's eyes were on Savannah, not on her. The wives whispered to Savannah, not to her. And Caleb, once attentive, once eager, was growing restless under the pressure of scandal. Naomi's desperation sharpened. She started calling Caleb incessantly during the day, leaving messages dripping with seduction and threat. "Don't forget what you promised me," she hissed once, her voice low. "I won't let her win, Caleb. Not after everything." When Caleb didn't answer, she showed up at his office uninvited, her perfume heavy enough to choke the air. "You can't ignore me," she snapped one afternoon, slamming the door shut behind her. "I gave up everything for you. I will not be treated like some secret you regret." Caleb ran a hand over his face, exhausted. "Naomi, do you understand what's happening? The firm is at risk. My reputation is at risk. You think this is some game. It is a game," Naomi cut him off, eyes flashing. "And I refuse to lose." Her recklessness spilled into public. At Le Sable, she accidentally brushed his hand in front of a client. At a rooftop bar, she raised her voice when he tried to leave early, drawing stares from strangers. The more Caleb pulled away, the more Naomi clung, desperate to force him back into her orbit. But desperation rarely looked attractive in Mariela Heights. Whispers began to change. Where once she was the mysterious other woman, now she was the unhinged sister. Women shook their heads when she walked into a room. Men smirked behind their glasses. Even her friends grew cold, unwilling to be tainted by the scandal she flaunted too openly. Savannah, meanwhile, only grew more radiant. At one gala, she brushed past Naomi with a serene smile, pausing just long enough to whisper, "You're playing too loudly, little sister. This city prefers silence." The words burned Naomi's pride. Late that night, she stood in front of her mirror, makeup smeared, hands trembling. She had always believed she could outshine Savannah if given the chance. But Savannah wasn't fighting her at all. She was simply existing and still winning. Naomi's chest heaved as a dark thought crossed her mind. If she couldn't outshine her sister, perhaps she would have to destroy her. Caleb Bishop was a man who had built his life on appearances. The bespoke suits, the slick glass office, the high-rise penthouse, all of it was armor. He had learned early in Mariela Heights that the city didn't care who you were. It only cared who you looked like. And Caleb always looked like a man in control. But control is a fragile illusion. It started with whispers at the firm. Partners who once praised his meticulous briefs now questioned his judgment. Clients who once insisted on him personally began requesting other attorneys. The rumor about his affair with Naomi had leaked far beyond Savannah's circle. Even though no one spoke it aloud in boardrooms, Caleb could see it in their eyes, doubt. Then came the cracks in his cases. A major oil conglomerate threatened to pull their retainer, citing concerns about stability. A high-profile divorce client switched firms altogether, leaving behind a stinging note. "I need someone whose life is less of a headline." Caleb buried himself in work, but the harder he pushed, the more the pressure mounted. He snapped at associates, barked at secretaries, paced the office halls like a man being hunted. Even the interns whispered, "He's slipping." At home, the tension was unbearable. Savannah moved with quiet dignity, her presence both a comfort and a reminder of what he had shattered. She no longer fought, no longer demanded answers. That silence ate at him worse than screaming ever could. At night, he lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, wondering when she would strike. And Naomi was a storm he couldn't control. She flooded his phone with calls and texts, threatened to expose their affair whenever he tried to create distance, and even hinted she might show up at his firm's board meeting, just to see who you really choose. The walls were closing in. Caleb's mentor, a senior partner named Mr. Adewale, finally pulled him aside after a disastrous meeting where Caleb fumbled over simple case details. "You're unraveling, son," Adewale said gravely. Mariela Heights smells weakness like blood. If you don't get control of this, your marriage, your mistress, your reputation, you won't just lose clients. You'll lose everything. Those words hit harder than any scandal. For the first time, Caleb saw the truth. He was no longer the man in control. He was a man being dragged by his own mistakes, his carefully built empire trembling beneath him. One night, after another fight with Naomi, he sat alone in his office, the city lights spilling across his desk. He stared at his reflection in the glass, his jaw clenched, his eyes sunken, his suit wrinkled. He barely recognized himself. And yet, deep inside, a flicker of arrogance still burned. He whispered to the empty room, as though convincing himself. I built this city's respect once. I can take it back. But Caleb didn't realize something crucial. Respect in Mariela Heights was like glass. Once cracked, it never looked the same again. Mariela Heights had never been kind to weakness. It was a city of marble lobbies, rooftop champagne, and whispered deals over cigars and private lounges. Everyone watched everyone, and everyone judged. It wasn't just about wealth. It was about presentation. The city adored winners and devoured losers. For years, Caleb Bishop had been one of its golden sons. His name opened doors, his suit set trends, his presence commanded attention in every ballroom. But now, the air was shifting. It started subtly. At charity galas, people who once greeted him with eager smiles began offering lukewarm nods before turning to chat with Savannah. At business luncheons, hosts placed Savannah closer to the power tables while Caleb found himself beside minor officials and second-rate socialites. He still looked the part, tailored navy suit, Rolex glinting under the chandeliers, but the city no longer believed the illusion. Naomi felt the shift even sharper. The boutiques where she once flaunted designer gowns suddenly offered her last season pieces first, the staff smiling too politely. Her circle of girlfriends, who once fed on scandal, began declining her brunch invitations. One even whispered, not softly enough, "She's nothing but a cautionary tale now." Savannah, meanwhile, blossomed. She didn't gloat, didn't strut, didn't even demand recognition. She simply existed with quiet poise. She walked into rooms dressed in silk that caught the light, her smile calm but unreadable, her conversations measured. People leaned toward her, drawn not only by her elegance, but by the mystery of her silence. She wasn't the scorned wife anymore. She was the woman who endured. In Mariela Heights, endurance was currency. One evening at the Ivory Tower, a restaurant perched 60 stories above the skyline, Savannah attended a dinner honoring the city's top innovators. Caleb wasn't invited. Naomi wasn't mentioned. But Savannah, seated beside the Minister of Commerce, was asked her opinion on the future of women in business. Her reply was simple, but it echoed through the room. Cities thrive when women are not silenced, but respected. Applause followed, and in that moment, the shift was sealed. The city had chosen sides. Caleb felt it most painfully when he walked into the Grand Meridian for a client's birthday celebration. Once, his arrival would have turned heads. This time, conversations barely paused. He spotted Savannah across the room, surrounded by a half-circle of admirers. Naomi, perched at the bar in a scarlet dress, waved dramatically at him. But the gesture only earned her a few raised eyebrows from onlookers. For the first time in his career, Caleb felt small in his own city. Later that night, Naomi stormed into his apartment furious. They're all staring at her. Like she's some saint. Do you not see what's happening? She's winning, Caleb. She's winning without even trying. Caleb didn't answer. He poured himself a drink, staring into the amber liquid, realizing she was right. The city had turned. And once Mariela Heights turned, it never looked back. Savannah Blake had never been a woman of grand speeches. She didn't need to be. Her strength had always been in the pauses between words, the way she listened, the way she carried herself as though the ground beneath her heels belonged to her. In a city like Mariela Heights, where everyone clawed for attention, her restraint became magnetic. She began to move differently, not out of vanity, but out of certainty. At networking events, while others bragged about deals and acquisitions, Savannah simply spoke about balance, how she managed her design projects, how she supported other women starting out, how she found peace in a world obsessed with noise. Her words were soft, but the power behind them was undeniable. Investors and politicians leaned closer, not for gossip, but for wisdom. The first tangible sign of her rising influence came with the invitation to the Pearl Summit, the city's most exclusive annual gathering of leaders. Normally, the guest list was a roll call of CEOs, top lawyers, oil magnates, and ministers. Caleb had fought for years to keep his name on it. This year, for the first time, Savannah's name appeared, without his beside it. Caleb pretended not to care. Naomi seethed. "She's nothing without your name," Naomi hissed one night, pacing his apartment in a silk robe. "They only pity her because of what happened. Don't you see? They'll forget her once something new comes along." But Caleb wasn't so sure. He had seen the way people leaned toward Savannah, not out of pity but respect. She wasn't fading. She was ascending. At the summit, Savannah wore an emerald gown that shimmered like the city lights reflected on water. She spoke on a panel about urban development, her voice steady, her points sharp yet compassionate. When she finished, the applause wasn't polite, it was thunderous. Even the Minister of Housing rose to shake her hand. Caleb, watching from a live stream in his office, felt his chest tighten. That applause used to be for him. Naomi, too, felt her grip loosening. Once, she had been the spark in every room. The daring sister who lived loudly, laughed boldly, flaunted recklessly. But beside Savannah's calm elegance, Naomi's energy now looked desperate. People whispered, "She's trying too hard." Savannah never gloated. She never mentioned the affair, never sought revenge. Her silence was her strategy. She let the city write the narrative for her, and in Mariela Heights, silence often spoke louder than scandal. One evening, after hosting a design showcase at the prestigious Orem Gallery, Savannah returned home to find a bouquet of lilies waiting with a note. "Your strength is teaching me more than my victories ever did." Caleb. She stared at it for a long moment before setting it aside untouched. Flowers didn't erase betrayal. Respect didn't rebuild trust. But still, the gesture told her something important. Caleb was crumbling, and he knew it. Savannah poured herself a glass of wine, stepped out onto her balcony, and gazed over the glittering skyline. The city that once doubted her now bowed quietly to her resilience. And she had only just begun to wield her power. Naomi Blake had always believed she could bend the city to her will. Her beauty, her daring laugh, her talent for finding trouble and turning it into a performance, it had carried her far. But now, in the quiet corners of Mariela Heights, she could feel herself being erased. At luncheons, she noticed how people looked past her to greet Savannah. At boutiques, sales clerks who once scrambled to impress her now treated her like an afterthought. Even Caleb had grown distant, no longer furious or passionate, but hollow, like a man quietly mourning his own downfall. Naomi couldn't stand it. "She's not better than me," she whispered to her reflection in the mirror one night, her scarlet lips trembling. "She just plays the victim better." That thought twisted inside her like glass. She couldn't let Savannah win. So Naomi devised a plan. If the city adored Savannah for her silence, Naomi would destroy that silence. If they admired Savannah for her strength, Naomi would create chaos to expose weakness. And if Caleb was slipping away into regret, Naomi would drag him back with one final spectacle. It began at the Sapphire Ball, the event of the season, hosted in the chandeliered ballroom of the Imperial Hotel. Everyone who mattered in Mariela Heights would be there. Politicians, billionaires, media moguls. And Savannah, of course, was the evening's honorary guest for her work in urban design. Naomi arrived late, as always, dressed in a gown of sequined gold that shimmered like fire under the chandeliers. She walked in with her head high, every inch the woman who refused to fade. But this time, her smile was dangerous. The speeches had just ended when Naomi made her move. She stepped onto the stage, grabbing the microphone with a laugh that silenced the orchestra. "Ladies and gentlemen," she purred, "before we toast this beautiful evening, I have a story you deserve to hear." Gasps rippled through the room. Caleb, standing near the back, froze. Savannah, seated at the head table, raised her chin, her face unreadable. Naomi's voice rang out like glass breaking. "The woman you're all applauding, the saint of Mariela Heights, Savannah Blake, she's not who you think she is. You admire her silence, but do you know why she's silent? Do you know what she hides?" The room buzzed, electricity crackling in the air. Savannah didn't flinch. She simply locked eyes with Naomi, her calmness a blade sharper than rage. Naomi felt the weight of that stare, but pressed on. She couldn't stop now. "You celebrate her strength, but she is not strong." "She is." But then she faltered. The words stuck in her throat. The city, the glittering crowd, the champagne glasses. All of it seemed to turn against her. Eyes narrowed. Whispers hissed. She realized, too late, that the more she raged, the more elegant Savannah appeared. Caleb's voice finally cut through the chaos, cold and low. Enough, Naomi. The silence that followed was devastating. Naomi stood trembling in the spotlight, her gambles slipping from her fingers. She had tried to destroy Savannah's image, but instead, she had exposed her own desperation. Savannah rose slowly, placed her napkin on the table, and walked toward the stage, not rushing, not angry, just steady. When she reached the microphone, she didn't defend herself. She simply said, "Mariela Heights doesn't need perfection. It needs honesty. And honesty is what I live by." Applause erupted, louder than ever. Naomi's last gambit had failed. But in the depths of her fury and shame, Naomi made a silent vow. If the city wouldn't let her win fairly, then she would burn every bridge until no one had anything left to stand on. And with that vow, her story was far from over.